welcome to this edition of the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders, a podcast series where we take an outlook on some of the opportunities and challenges that sustainability leaders are facing in this period of transition towards a net zero destination for countries, for economies, for companies. We're all on that journey. And the question that we're looking at today is, what is the outlook in 2023? Here we are sitting in the early part of the year. What is the outlook in 2023 for successfully developing smart, sustainable cities in the Middle East and Africa? Certainly the opportunity, the fast-growing urbanization of the world, and this region no exception, with mega cities like Cairo, like Nairobi, and also in Riyadh now, looking to double the size of the capital city of Saudi Arabia, the UAE growing all the time, Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So no shortage of mega cities to develop a more smart outcome. Let's kick off our discussion today with our host, Hazem Nabi, Regional Technology Officer, Middle East and Africa at Microsoft. Hazem, perhaps you'll get us underway with some of your thoughts in answering the theme of the podcast.
Thank you, Sean, and welcome all to the podcast today. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us and sharing your valuable insights and learnings. I think smart cities and sustainable smart cities is a very exciting topic. I mean, first and foremost, we're seeing a lot of focus and emphasis on everything sustainability in the region. This has started predominantly with the COP27 in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh. I'm sure some of you might have been there. I think it showed how sustainability is at the core of what governments are thinking about. For the region, this is even more important, as we're expecting to also host COP28 again in Dubai next year. So with that happening in the region, we're seeing a lot of emphasis from all dimensions to really accelerate on every aspect of sustainability, not only cities. With cities specifically, which is at the core of our discussion today, maybe if you themes we're seeing is that cities are not all trying to solve for the same problems. So from cities in Africa like Cairo, where large numbers of populations are there, and the stage is still an early stage of trying to solve and cater for some of the sustainability challenges the city is going through, to very advanced and developed cities. When we say smart cities or sustainable cities in the region that have smaller populations and have more advanced needs because of how they have embraced certain technologies or certain lifestyles in the GCC region, for example, we have a big continuum of requirements that we're seeing. But the only constant factor we're seeing across all of that is that technology today plays a critical role in catering and for solving for sustainable cities. Without technology, it will be very difficult for us to foresee any city making forward steps in terms of solving and providing for the requirements of the citizens and the residents in that city.
And Hazem, is that ultimately, just to interject there, sorry, is that ultimately a measurement tool, the ability that if you can measure it, you can change it, you can improve it from the digital data point of view?
I mean, measurement and data are at the core of everything. Of course, we say, like Sean, like you've mentioned, if you cannot measure it and if you cannot record it, then you cannot basically report it and do anything with it. So at Microsoft, we believe that the data required for the recording and for the reporting is really essential. But I think it's even bigger than that. Bigger, without starting to automate and digitize some of the services that the cities can and need to do, it is difficult to even have the data. If you're not going to automate a lot of the manual processes that are happening today, if we're not going to introduce digital technologies as the way to provide services in cities, it's going to be very difficult to make and take steps forward. So the point I wanted to make is that at Microsoft, we see that we are at a very important point in really trying to embrace technology and introduce technology at different levels to solve for different problems. So we have a number of solutions that we really look forward to take and explore with different cities, but we also have a very wide variety of solutions coming from our ecosystem of partners that provide and cater for these challenges that the cities are going through. And through that, we basically want to help every city create and craft the customized roadmap that works best for it. So it's not a one size fit all or a one problem that we're trying to solve, but we feel that the common denominator there is technology, and we really look forward to partnering with different cities to be their technology partner. So, if I may say.
Thank you very much, Hazem. Let's welcome Huda Shaka, Sustainable Development City Advisor, founder at the Green Urbanista. Huda, welcome your opening comments, and particularly if you would, in your opening comments, just address where are we at in this journey in the context of Middle East and Africa in developing smart and sustainable cities?
Thank you, Sean. The way I look at it, we're almost on wave 3 or 4. So they're starting in the early 2000s or mid 2000, 2005, 6, 7. There was a big focus on green buildings and green building certification and energy efficiency at a building level. The next wave was around master plans and pilot projects that are beyond a single building, whether it's Masdar City or Msherib or other more ambitious sustainability projects. And at that, when we start talking at a master plan level, then the conversation moves beyond the resource efficiency, whether it's energy, water, and or waste. There's those components are still part of the sustainable master plan discussion. There are additional components, though, around external comfort, around livability, around walkability. So we saw the conversation around sustainable development and sustainability broaden to include some of those themes. And then the third wave, the big push around net zero and the climate emergency and the COP events happening last year and this year in the region. Obviously, in between there were many milestones. But if I were to look at the big trends, I think we're probably around wave 3 at the moment, where we're talking not just at a particular on a district level or a master plan level or a building level. We're talking citywide. How can the city, or even nationwide, how can the city overall deliver to its residents, its visitors? And then again, sustainable development is broadened. With SDGs are a big part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, are a big part of the conversation today, as well as obviously the discussions around net zero, climate mitigation, and sometimes we talk about adaptation, which is great. Health and well-being, of course, with the pandemic still in our recent memory, then that has gotten an even bigger push. And of course, technology has been a thread throughout, and over the years there are more and more options, more and more solutions. And the opportunity is, though, really understanding what's the objective and how can technology get us closer. Technology and smart cities get us closer to the objective, as opposed to just giving us gimmicks that may or may not be useful.
Gimmicks. There's no shortage of those around. Let's welcome Karim El-Gendi, Associate Director, Sustainable Planning Lead at Bureau Happold. Karim, would you agree with where that has been positioned by Huda in terms of that 3-step, or how do you see the framing, where we're at in the road, if you like?
Sure. I agree with a lot of what Huda said. I would add that cities are arenas of contestation. There are global agendas around the world. The environmental agenda and environmental sustainability agenda is driven by climate, conservation, protected biodiversity. There's another agenda about digitization, which is strongly supported by digital evangelists around the world for whatever goals. I mean, it could be about surveillance, it could be about improving efficiency, it could be about user experience. It's digital service ultimately, and a tool. There's an agenda about resilience and maintaining city operations. There's an agenda about wellness and human welfare. And within cities, we find these agendas manifesting themselves into different factors, pushing and pulling cities in different directions. Sometimes cooperate and find synergies between them. Sometimes you can find solutions that can serve both agendas, 2 agendas or 4 agendas, as the case may be. And in some cases they contradict each other. And ultimately, technology can play a role, be that digital or other technologies. Sometimes people include renewable energy technologies, for example, as part of smart city solutions. But technology overall...
Does it ultimately, Karim, I mean, when you think of that journey, so to speak, as articulated by Huda in that 3-step approach, and you have added to that, is this a revolution? Is it a evolution? I mean, we're seeing in Saudi Arabia, for example, the idea that cities have to be completely reconceived as concept. The Line, for example, 300-kilometer long city. Do we have to reinvent everything here, or is a smart, sustainable city? Can we evolve that? Can Cairo evolve to that destination?
Well, there's no suggestion that we're in any way going in a progressive direction. We're seeing increased consumption and increased impacts on the environment, increased environmental footprint caused by the cities. So whether cities are moving in the right direction, we can't say that categorically, because there are conflicting trends around the world in global cities. And the reconception of cities is certainly not a new idea. We've seen that since Baghdad about 1,000 years ago. And so the idea that we have to restructure the way we live in an urban context in a way that best serves the current needs of society has been around for a while, and it's continuously being relooked at. Are our built environments suited for the current needs of the society and the current challenges facing the societies? At the moment, the climate emergency seems to be at the forefront of everyone, and it's driving a lot of the carbon-related drives, the carbon-related moves. That could be at building scale, city scale, neighborhood scale, company scale, and that's certainly one of the main factors that are shaping cities today. Technology comes in and says, well, we can help you do some of those things, and we could even manage the whole process for you, and that's great. Would I call it a revolution? Certainly, the digital component of it is certainly a revolution, and it's about to see a new step up with the emergence of artificial intelligence, as we are currently seeing in the last few weeks and months. So I would say there are sometimes step changes, but on the environmental sustainability front, which I will focus my comments on, there is no suggestion that we're certainly moving in the right direction. Ultimately, everyone is saying we need to reduce our emissions, but ultimately their emissions are still going up.
Ala Abusiam, CEO of Middle East and South Asia at Aegis. Ala, maybe you can talk us a little bit in the immediate sense of 2023, which of course we're trying to keep this on that path in this tangible moment of time with COP28 at the end of November. What can be achieved, if you like, this year with that as a catalyst to make this transition, this transformation to advance successfully develop smart and sustainable cities in the Middle East and Africa?
Thank you, Sean, and thanks, Hazem, for the invite, and good to meet you all. I think 2023 is definitely going to be a big year in the Middle East on the back of COP27 in Egypt and now 28 in UAE in the region 2 years in a row. That brings to the forefront, if it's not there already, the subject of sustainability and reduction of carbon emissions. And let's face it, I mean, as much as we think we're making progress, when you look at actual emissions and trends, it's not yet going in the right direction globally. Although a lot of the commitments are being made, there is still a lot of room for us here. And I think you put a strong panel together in terms of representation, because the way we look at it, we've seen a lot of progress happening at the different layers when it comes to urbanism. There is the layer of the actual physical infrastructure, which a lot of us, like Aegis engineers, work on designing and implementing green infrastructure solutions. But then you have the ultimate user who gets the service or needs the service, and a lot of innovation has been happening in terms of the applications and how those services reach the citizens of those cities. But then you have the massive digital layer in between, where this intangible assets and the likes of Microsoft come in. And historically, we've been working through a lot of separate spaces. But now we can see there is more and more holistic approach, whether it's in the UAE or in Saudi, where, like you described it, it could be, a revolution in specific technologies. But when you look at it holistically, it's actually more of a transition. And that transition, for it to happen, one, you need that holistic view. Two, you need that sort of long-term view that is pretty much happening with the new and mega cities that are being developed in Saudi, but also the flexibility around the technologies, because even what applies today may or may not apply, 2 years or 5 years from now. So I think 2023 is going to be a year under the spotlight where we're all challenged to look at specific problems for our cities, because we have some existing cities that needs to be sort of reinvented or reshaped. And then you have the challenge of developing these big, massive new cities and doing it in a way that doesn't necessarily consume more of the natural resources that are becoming more and more scarce.
Hazem, you mentioned in your opening comments the word accelerate. And ultimately the digital tool, the technology tool, allows to do the things we need to do. Is it also the accelerator? Is there other components? How do you see accelerate in this context, in this moment of time? We heard all about that in Davos last week. We had John Kerry, the current special envoy on climate from the United States here. He talked about the lack of financing, that we're on just not on the right trajectory, and accelerate seems to be the word of this year. And for the hosts of UAE COP28, it's all about implementation COP. So where is the nugget to achieve acceleration?
I think in order to accelerate, we honestly have to identify the core areas of where we can make the fastest progress. I think we have a closing window of opportunity. I think a lot of the colleagues on the call mentioned the word emissions, and I think cities struggle, for example, with emissions as one of the probably biggest problems when it comes to the environment. Emissions in cities is one of the problems that are requiring that level of acceleration.
We see in New Delhi and in Beijing and these mega developing urban centers, you can't breathe in them now. There's days where they have to stop people coming into the center of the city.
Yeah, and luckily, I mean, we don't still have, if we look at the region, if we look at the Middle East and Africa region, the industrial development level is not as far as some of these cities. So luckily, we don't want to get to that point, right? We want to act fast on emissions, for example, and not get fast. But if we also look at what's happening today, if we look at any city, there isn't a robust mechanism, for example, to assess and measure and record and report on emissions. So at Microsoft, for example, we're encouraging every city to really start to embrace what we call an emissions accounting and reporting platform. Today, we find that it's ad hoc in many places. It's not been automated, and we cannot make the right progress by identifying what are the biggest causes of emissions, because it will differ from city to city. It will differ whether that is coming from an industrial aspect, whether it's coming from a traffic aspect, what is contributing. And without having that 360 view, without having the data on, for example, what composes your emission structure and how is this trending over time, we really can't make progress. So to accelerate, we see that there is an opportunity to really start to embrace technologies that allow us to record and report on some of these things, like emissions. To start with, let's all embrace recording and reporting on emissions transparently, so that then we can know what are the areas we need to address, focus on these, and achieve the right acceleration.
Well, in that achievement, or in that opportunity, the automation of that recording is one of those tools. Huda, you mentioned the first 3 phases that we're in this roadmap, this journey. What's 4th and 5th, and how do we get there quicker? What are the new technologies, smart city technologies, particularly in 2023? We saw just today or yesterday, I think, Microsoft announcing the billions of dollars investment in ChatGPT, the new AI tool. Is that one of the tools that can bring this acceleration? Your thoughts? We lost you. I think you're on mute.
Yes, thank you very much for the question.
Please.
I mean, 20 years ago, we had all the science and all the technology we needed to stop climate change. So to me, when I talked about the phases, it was and maybe this is coming from a spatial planning background, that's really almost the spatially going from a building to a district to a city and a nation, and also in terms of
to a region.
To a region, yes, correct. And also in terms of scope, going from just energy efficiency or resource efficiency to more including the environmental and social components at the district level, and then at the city level, it's looking more at all of the also policy and international diplomacy at cities or at the national level. To me, it's and this is kind of maybe relating to some of the comments Karim made. It's not about bringing in, cooler toys or using bigger words or adding more buzzwords. This is about doing what we committed to doing, or well, actually first committing to do more and then actually doing it. So and as I said, we're here not because we lack technology or the science. It's a combination of other factors beyond those two realms. Now, it's fantastic that we have more technology. We have to be able to use that. And when it comes to data collection, again, a lot of the government entities and private entities I worked with have too much data. Their problem is actually they don't know what to do with their data, and they get confused. They don't know what are the important pieces of data that they should look at and focus on and analyze.
Well, how to convert data into intelligence is ultimately the most important piece of acceleration, one would think.
Absolutely. And in order to do that, I think a big part of the answer that we're missing in the Middle East and North Africa region is locally based and locally relevant research to work with the professional community, to work with the policy level, and to have that kind of three-way interaction and trust and learning and continued progress. And without the arm of credible, strong research, and that is kind of from the region for the region, that to me, that's, I feel, a piece that we're missing. Without that, it's difficult to get the intelligence that we need when we need it.
Karim, I'd like you to speak a little bit to the opportunity of developing smart, sustainable cities from scratch versus transforming cities to become smart, right? We have these two very significant models. Even in Cairo, the biggest city in the Arab world, has developed New Cairo as the kind of the sort of the parachute escape nearly. This old Cairo is probably quite difficult to transform. If you might speak a little bit to develop how those two coexist, how can they inform each other, or are they on completely separate tracks?
Sure. So setting aside the question of whether they're smart or not, because I think smart city is just the technologies.
Yes.
But the goal here
the deployment of
certain technologies in order to achieve an agenda goal. If the agenda goal here is sustainability, then the challenges of retrofitting an existing city versus developing a new one are much higher. Retrofitting a city to achieve the right density of population, which is really critical, fundamental to achieving urban sustainability, it takes decades. And retrofitting a city to include a public transportation network like the ones that we had seen expensively being weaved into Riyadh or Doha is also very difficult. And the fundamentals of retrofitting buildings in a way that deep retrofits of buildings in a way that increases their energy efficiency are far more expensive than building new, which is why we've seen development on the new green buildings versus retrofitting those millions of buildings that we have really poor energy efficiency. So the basic point here is existing cities are much more difficult to deal with and to adapt to the standards that we aspire to. The problem is those existing cities are going to still be there by 2050 and by the end of the century. New cities are much easier. They give you a tabula rasa, blank slate. You could work on them, develop and integrate technologies as they stand on the day at which they're being constructed, which is theoretically great. But of course, there are always pitfalls that you can only see in hindsight when you develop those new cities. Sometimes you abandon lessons that you've learned from centuries of developing in a particular context, and you adapt new technologies, but not necessarily adapt the heritage of design that has allowed thermal comfort, for example, to be maintained in the outdoor areas within those cities. So a mix, in my view, in designing those cities of design, planning, and technology, I think would go a long way to achieving the goals of sustainability. But if you ask me whether we should build new, I would still be on the fence. The reason is there's other factors involved here. Abandoning centuries, millennia of investment into existing cities still carries a lot of weight, and abandoning that and leaving that and building somewhere else also has an environmental footprint as well. So this isn't just about the operations or the efficiency of the operations, also about the efficiency of building new and abandoning all the investment that has happened. And the examples that we had seen in the region can only be justified if the demand requires them. So if the population growth is such that you either have to grow an existing city beyond its possible capacity, or you build somewhere else at a better location where you can build a new city that can be better suited to the environment, for its natural resources, then that might be a viable point. But building new just for building new, I think, would be ill-advised.
Ala, if you could speak to where governance plays a role here, how would you describe the governance of smart, sustainable cities in the region? What grade would you give them? And I mean, ultimately, governance kind of has the sense from the top down. What about the ground up? So governance, if you could speak to that.
So I think in terms of governance, it's obviously early days. Cities are still acting to a great extent in silos to implement solutions that come through. There is a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to governance of data. Smart cities will inevitably generate significant amounts of data, and they already do. And one key aspect of that is emerging now, is the clash between those who build the infrastructure and those who use the data for their business model and not having invested in putting the infrastructure in place. So there is a lot of interesting, obviously, development in that space. But then the governance around the new economic models, because there is no doubt that we are a growing region in terms of population and GDP, etc. But in order to continue on that growth trend, we just need to find ways to grow not on the expense of the natural resources. And the new economic models around that, whether it has to do with the sharing economy, with the circular economy, or sort of the intangible, which is the data itself, I think we still have ways to go. The governance is heavily centralized, obviously, so the involvement of the private sector and the involvement of multiple stakeholders in setting that governance in place requires a lot more interactions and collaboration. And we saw the G20 Global Sustainability Alliance put in place. There is a couple of cities in the region who have signed up to that. But from an implementation point of view and a roadmap, ideally the year 2023 and the COP28 being in UAE would be the platform where the region can take that as an advantage, and really the cities could get together and come up with creative models and implementations, because we would see a lot of events alongside COP28. A lot of it has to do with actual meaningful work that we hope that can translate into this sort of collaboration happening around cities to test. Because just to piggyback on what Karim was saying, for sure, to design for new cities would be easier. But the advantage existing cities have, obviously, is they can experiment, they can implement right away, and they can feed into the design of the new cities the solutions that work. And I agree with Huda completely in terms of a lot of the technology already exists, but how do we change behaviors around?
Well, on that point, Huda, just to come in there, you've obviously consulted a lot in the public sector in the region. There's an opportunity here for governance by decree. We have a structural system here where things can be implemented that want to be implemented. If you could speak to governance and how COP28 can act, could be, is an opportunity not to be missed to implement a more robust governance approach. Your thoughts?
I agree that the governance structures in many of the Gulf countries and cities helps with the pace of development and the pace of change. So then that we see that whether it's at a level of getting a planning approval for a project and seeing it get built, or whether it's a policy change overnight, a green building code could be required, or regulations could be implemented. So that's definitely an aspect of the region which comes with a lot of opportunities. COP28 ultimately is an international negotiation at a national level. It does create some momentum. It can be a catalyst for action at a local level and at a region level. People, because some of the conversations I'm hearing over the past few months from everything from government to private to academia is we're going to have a stand or a booth or a presence at COP28. What are we going to have to say? What are we going to show up with? So it gives people almost a target date to pick up their pace and up their game and have something meaningful to show, which is fantastic.
Well, in that there should be an obligation. Is there an opportunity to make that progress a bit more of a requirement or a consequence of not?
I don't think that's how COP works.
Not COP. I'm talking about the context of the region. Clearly, as you said, COP is an international treaty negotiation, but the hosting thereof creates a culture of awareness around all of these issues, using the opportunity for governance to sort of demand progress.
So again, I would say the Gulf, and I can use the UAE as an example, has probably gone further and faster than many other regions in terms of setting minimum requirements and regulations. But that only gets you so far. And because as soon as you set a minimum requirement, that's a legal requirement for everybody. And almost by definition, that can't be very ambitious, because you don't want to end up completely cutting off companies or entities or individuals from the market. What I think we need to almost mature the market and the profession and the governance, so that it's not just about setting minimum regulations, which are there. It's about also including enablers, incentives. If I want to do more than just the bare minimum, what can I get in return? And so it's using other policy tools beyond just setting regulatory requirements.
Hazel, I want to just wrap up talking a little bit about innovative culture with everybody, and starting with you. You, of course, are the Regional Technology Officer at Microsoft. You develop digital transformation partnerships with governments and some of these regulated industries that we were just talking about with Huda. Where does that innovative culture, where's the trigger point in order to play an accelerating role? I mean, we do live in a region where smartphone penetration is above 200% in some places. That's a critical tool to facilitate and enable transformation. Your thoughts on that innovation and that digital penetration?
Yeah, I think maybe I'd like to go a little bit step back and then take it forward into innovation. But
Please.
I think when we look at the COP events in the last few years, and as much as they're a policy negotiation event, what I've seen at COP27, having been there on the ground for the duration of that event, is really they're creating an opportunity to create the awareness within the populations of these nations. We today in the region, to be very transparent, I think we need to do a lot more on the enablement, the awareness, and creating that sustainable understanding. What does it mean to be sustainable? What does it mean to live sustainably? Today, many of the youth, when I look at my children personally, I think they're starting to understand and get the right level of attention. And what does it mean to live sustainably? I think maybe some of the older generations today that did not go through that through their education, or where education curriculums don't cover for that, might not have that level of awareness. So the community itself, by having these events, is starting to develop that level of awareness. That level of awareness is really a catalyst for a lot of things that we're seeing. One of which is innovation for sure. But as the populations in these cities get the level of awareness on wanting to be in a sustainable city, wanting to live that sustainable lifestyle, and really requesting that of the cities they live in. We're seeing this as a catalyst to accelerate some of the transformation happening in cities today. That is one point. And with that comes the innovation. With that comes the innovation. Today, for example, we're seeing a lot of focus on the region, on the concept of metaverse. And what does the metaverse mean when it comes to sustainability? How can you take some of the activities today that have an environmental footprint and use technology like the metaverse, which would help reduce the environmental footprint of some of these activities? And there's a lot of innovation on introducing such aspects in our daily life. For example, and I hope it doesn't, because as much as I love technology and as much as this is what I do and I have been doing for a very long time, I think there's an opportunity to balance between technologies and new innovative technologies, like taking events to the metaverse, for example, taking concerts or music or art to the metaverse, and how does this have an effect on the city, right? I mean, think about a very congested city because of an event, and then when you take that event and you put it in the metaverse, that reduces the effect on the traffic, for example, or providing government services in the metaverse and having to reduce the number of commutes that happen to execute some of these services. If you can use these technologies today to substitute for some of the processes that were very difficult to do even with digital technologies today, through new innovations like metaverse or like 5G networks that are now increasing the ability to have better data access and better coverage on the go and in remote places and so on. All of these are things that are all correlated, and I think that innovation is going to play a role to really help accelerate that transformation within cities.
I'd like to just give our guests a 1 minute sort of wrap up closing comment. Again, back to the original question, what is the outlook in 2023 for successfully developing smart, sustainable cities in the Middle East and Africa? And if you would, in your closing comments, try to give us some really tangible sort of low-hanging fruit where we can make an impact or seek to in this year. Sorry, I got to start. I should have said who's going to start. Huda, of course, as you did at the beginning, please.
Sure, thank you. In terms of low-hanging fruit, probably a better understanding and focus on user experience and engagement of the users, whether it's at a resident, a tourist, a citizen. It's one way around the absence of legal requirement for public engagement and on projects, etc., and policy scenarios. So if we can actually use the tools that we have to understand better what the challenges are and also communicate and get feedback from the users, then that takes us forward on the sustainability front, on the livability front, on the well-being front, on the smart city front, because it means that we're making more informed decisions and we're giving back. We're hearing from the people and giving them a say as well.
Ala Boussiam, your closing thoughts, please.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is the 21st century great equation. How do we continue that sort of economic growth without really consuming as much of the natural resources as we have been? And I think to close,
as it was stated here in the UAE in Abu Dhabi recently at ADIPEC by the now president of COP28, maximum energy, minimum emissions.
Yeah, and if I would close with the innovation comment,
yes.
Two things. One, I would say we really need to expand the innovation discussion beyond technology. I know we all know it does, but it's very easy to slide into a technology discussion when innovation in the actual economic models and situational behaviors of citizens could go a long way. And between us as private sector and government, we can collaborate on a lot of that. And the other thing I would say is the business case for innovation needs to be at the forefront as well. You can see a lot of interest today in ecotourism, because ecotourism, it's the fastest growing sector of tourism in general. If you look at green infrastructure that is built into development now increases the real estate value by estimated 10 to 30%. So it becomes common sense, not just because of the climate or smart tag on it, but just because people see value and they're willing to invest in it.
Karim El Gendi, please, your closing thoughts. I think you're on mute, Kareem. Sorry.
Sure. So in order to achieve all those great benefits like community engagement or citizen engagement, I think cities need to have better governance. They need to have powers. They need to have the ability to reach out directly to their residents, to their citizens of the city. And at the moment, with the exception of Dubai, which is both a city and an emirate, we don't have cities with a lot of governance powers. There's not much competence or delegated authorities from the national level to cities level. So what I would like to see in 2023 is an increased role for cities as players, as stakeholders in and of themselves. Just to give you one anecdote, cities represent 70% of global emissions, but in the climate negotiations, they're observers. They have zero capabilities, zero saying.
Put the mayors in the front
negotiation.
row. Put the mayors in the front row.
Mayors and city councils need to play a bigger role. The only country where we've seen this implemented to a better level is in Morocco, where the decentralization law has played a role in giving some competence, some delegated powers to cities and local authorities. But by and large, cities are not on the table where issues related to cities are being discussed. And unfortunately, that is something that needs to be rectified to unleash the power of cities and allow all of those players, the planners, the designers, the technology providers, to support them in helping them achieve all the city's potential and unleash the city potential.
Hazem Nabia, our host, Regional Technology Officer, Middle East and Africa of Microsoft, please, if you would, just wrap us up in your closing comments.
Thank you, Sean. I first want to start by thanking you for hosting this podcast today and for bringing us from different sides of the business and to share such valuable views. I think it's these great opportunities to come together, to learn from each other, and really work together across different aspects of the city that is going to take us ahead, right? From the different industries, from the regulation, from the city, and from the technology angle as well. And sustainability is a big problem for one side to take care of it. If we are going to leave it for the city, it's going to be difficult. I think it's the entire ecosystem that needs to come together to really advance and learn from each other and put hands together to really take step forward. So I want to close by thanking all of our guests today for taking the time to be here. And we look forward to keeping the conversation, exploring potential business opportunities, and exploring partnerships to advance this with the region and every city in the region. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much. That wraps up this edition of the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders podcast. A community in which is emerging across the region, the Middle East and Africa, and hopefully together and through our brainstorming, we could play a small role in advancing not only the ultimate achievement of net zero as one of the goals, but also as this community emerges, sustainability leaders, chief sustainability officers, heads of ESG in different companies and institutions, that this can be in some small way some kind of a resource. So thank you all, Kareem, Allah, and Huda, for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you all again soon.